lectures as well. They've all been different and I think quite fascinating, and obviously you're an interested audience, and so I think you might enjoy coming tomorrow as well. Tonight we have, I think, a very special presentation for you. It's special to me because we get to welcome back one of our former curators here at the Wolfsonian, Whitney Richardson, who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. But before I get there, I do want to make sure that you know that this is part of an ongoing series that we're doing here at the Wolfsonian. This lecture just happens to fall during Art Deco weekend, but the reality is it's part of the Mamolen series that we do on the American homes. And this is our second in that series, and so we wanted to make sure that you knew that, and that you looked out in the future for our next one, which will also be, of course, about American homes. So, as I've already mentioned, we have 3 curators here today. In case you need more curators, there's a few more in the audience, but we have 3 curators with us today to talk about Art Deco. You know, we have a stunning show upstairs on the 7th floor, and each one of these curators played a role in the creation of that exhibition. I'm going to start with our former curator, Whitney Richardson, who is in the middle. Whitney. Whitney is now up in Asheville at the Asheville Art Museum as an assistant curator. But when she was with us, not that long ago, she conceived of the Art Deco show that you see upstairs. She really kind of gave us the floor plan for that exhibition and really helped guide us in terms of what we were going to create and what we were going to include. But because she did receive this new job, we were able then to hire Shoshana Resnikoff. And Shoshana then joined our team, and she helped kind of fulfill the vision for the show with Silvia Barisione on the end. And Silvia has been with us for a little bit longer, and prior to that, she was with us at the Wolfsoniana in Genoa. I do want to make one kind of personal remark because I think it's really important for all of us. I think that many of us are always concerned with immigration and what's going on in the United States. And so I have a bit of good news to share. And that is that Silvia has recently received her green card on her way to becoming an American citizen. Each of these curators brings really a wealth of knowledge with them. They're highly educated, they have been trained at many institutions, and they have worked in a variety of different capacities. I'm just going to run through very briefly some of their many accomplishments, and then I'll leave it to you to introduce yourselves at the end and talk more with them individually. Whitney has a Master's of Philosophy from Glasgow University in Scotland in the history of design and decorative arts. She also holds her undergraduate degree from Columbia. And as I said, she was working with us in many different capacities actually before she left us as a curator here. Shoshana is our new curator, as I've already mentioned. She holds an MA from the Winterthur Program in Material Culture at the University of Delaware. And prior to coming to us, she was at the Peabody Essex. And then prior to that, at many other distinguished institutions as well. And I will leave that for further discussion. As I've already mentioned, Silvia comes to us from the Wolfsoniana in Genoa. She also has her master's degree in decorative arts, but she is one of the founding curators of the Wolfsoniana in Genoa, where she really helped establish that institution. And we're very fortunate to have her because of that knowledge. She really brings these 2 institutions together so that we're always in relationship to one another and that we really understand which each collection holds. You know, when Micky Wolfson created these 2 institutions, it really was his idea that we would be in constant collaboration with one another. And Silvia, I think, is that perfect bridge. And that's why we're doubly happy that she is going to be with us here in the United States. So, I think what the format for this evening is going to be, each one of the curators is going to talk. They're going to come up here and show some slides, and then at the end, if you have questions, they will be open to that. So I think we're going to start with Whitney.
Right. Can everyone hear me okay? Right. So, this evening, first house we'll be looking at tonight is the Florida Tropical Home from the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, A Century of Progress. I hope many of you might recognize it, but what you may not realize is the important role it played in bringing streamlined architecture to Miami Beach. All right, let's begin with the two World's Fairs that bookend the exhibition here at the Wolfsonian. We start in 1925 in Paris, France, with the fair that introduced the world to Art Deco, and that's the poster on the left. Oh, thank you. And we end 8 years later in Chicago, Illinois, at A Century of Progress with the style of streamline. To tell the complete story of the 1933 Florida Tropical Home, I think we need to talk about how we got here. It was the plan of the 1925 French exhibition organizers to develop a new, original style of architecture and the decorative arts, which they did. They were certainly successful at that. But there was always a faction of architects, designers, and critics that felt the machine and its aesthetic should have been taken up at that time as the style of the future. You can see from this picture here, this is Edgar Brandt's Gate of Honor. You can see that the machine aesthetic did not win as the prevailing style of this exhibition, and rather a very ornate and handmade style became the style of that exhibition. Looking back at the Paris exhibition in 1941, the Museum of Modern Art did an exhibition on the history of organic furniture, which they defined as combining structure, function, and purpose, and said this, what I take as a wonderfully backhanded comment. 1925, the time when the superficial modernistic of the Paris exhibition was at its peak. The curator here, Elliot Noyes, his use of the word modernistic is important, as he clearly had a different definition than the French exhibition organizers. The two styles at the 1925 fair describe themselves, as you can see here on the screen. Art moderne and the international style. What we now look back at and call Art Deco was at the time referred to as Art moderne, or modern art. It was new, it didn't take direct quotes from historic design, but it did reference it. It was luxurious, expensive, and it featured exquisite hand craftsmanship. And it's not by coincidence that department stores played such a large role in the Paris exhibition. The success of Art Deco was predicated on the fact that designers could convince people, and that department stores, like Bon Marché, could convince people that the finer the object you owned, the more cultured you would be. On the right, we have Le Corbusier, whose ultimate goal throughout his career was to create a machine for living. A home so functional that it made life easier. A home that was built entirely of industrial materials like concrete, steel, and glass, and could be affordable to the majority. Le Corbusier was a contemporary of Walter Gropius, the founder of the Bauhaus, and Germany was not invited to the 1925 fair. And so to put the New Spirit Pavilion here on your right in context, it was up at the same time that the Bauhaus was well underway and moving into its new building in Dessau, Germany. It was the architecture and design of Le Corbusier and Walter Gropius that was looking to bring together designers and manufacturers to create aesthetically beautiful, high quality, but mass-produced furniture that was meant for city living and middle-income families. They were attempting to solve a much bigger problem than Art Moderne, or Deco, as we now call it, ever set out to. So you can see why the Museum of Modern Art, on the previous screen, would make a statement that Art Deco was superficially modern, because it was the pavilion on the right, Le Corbusier's, that could truly claim it held the modern spirit. So how did we get here? What led to Art Moderne or Art Deco? And I don't mean to admonish it so much, because it really was trying to do something new. But starting in around 1900, architects and designers from all around Europe and the United States were attempting to make a break from historical styles. The example I show here on the left is the Secession Building by Joseph Albrecht. In Vienna, it was built as an exhibition hall to showcase the art of those artists looking for something new that shared that vision, much like Art Deco was doing at the same time in France, so before Art Deco. And I think it looks an awful lot like the Bon Marché department store. If you kind of switch back again here. Let's see. On the right, we have the example of Walter Gropius's architecture. I mentioned him in the slide before, the Master's House at the Bauhaus, and which I think not coincidentally bears a great resemblance to the Florida tropical home. So what happened that everything changed? How did we get from Art Deco to Streetline? It was one big event, the Depression. In the years after the Paris exhibition, as department stores successfully convinced Americans and Europeans to accept this new style into their homes, it suddenly became unsustainable. For the most part, Art Deco meant luxury, and luxury meant expense. And just as suddenly, that Le Corbusier and Bauhaus ideal of a home so functional it made life easier sounded really good. And the fact that it was affordable meant that a sort of stripped down Art Deco and streamlined Deco took root. Although, as this cartoons by William Heath Robinson, I think very amusingly points out that it was not so easy to convince people. In the lower right, you have a sort of normal 1920s kitchen. In the middle, we have what was one of hundreds of thousands of magazines that came out at the time saying, here's your old house, here's how to turn it into your new Art Deco house. And then the visitors for dinner, not so sure they want to sit in that Bauhaus furniture. So we made it, finally, for the 1933 World's Fair in Chicago. It's a century of progress, they called it, from frontier settlement to one of the greatest cities in the world. And just to orient everyone, on your far right, you're looking at the Adler Planetarium out towards the water, and the Sheds Aquarium in by the shoreline, and circled here in red is what we're going to focus on, which is the Homes of Tomorrow exhibition. All right. Most of the homes in this section highlighted a specific construction method or a new material that was being used in home construction. The ones that still exist today are the Weeble Rostone home, the Lumber Industries home, which was a log cabin, the Enamel home, and our Florida Tropical home. Although they've been moved, we'll get to that later. All right, this is the front page of the guidebook that visitors would have received when they toured the Florida Tropical home at the 1933 World's Fair. It's also where, from now on, a majority of the images that I'll be showing and the quotations that I read come from that guidebook that you would have received to go with you through the house. The guidebook starts with a message from the governor of Florida. And Florida was the only state that participated with its own model home. And it was a big old advertisement for Florida, the whole house. And explain to everyone why you should want to find quote, rest and recreation under her sunny skies. Florida, the governor said, was the playground of the nation, and in fact, where summer spends the winter. And I just wanted to point out again, at the 1933 World's Fair, we talked about the Bauhaus. There was no German pavilion. There was a German-American pavilion, but there was no German pavilion. So this house really took on the role of modernism at the fair. The back view of it on Lake Michigan. And remember how Art Deco was all about convincing the consumer that the more luxurious object they had, the more cultured they were. Now, after the Depression, the focus changed, and it was all about selling to the middle class. If they could be convinced, if the middle class could be convinced to spend money, perhaps the economy would recover. Since Chicago was an important center of manufacturing, a lot of streamlined design came out of this city, including these homes, including this entire exhibition. The style was new, it was easily mass-produced, and therefore less expensive, and its aerodynamic design expressed a sense of optimism and power that the country greatly needed at the time. Here's the problem with this house. Where the other homes in the Homes of Tomorrow exhibit were meant for the middle class, the Florida Tropical House was twice as expensive and couldn't have been purchased by most of the people that went to see it. At the time of construction, it cost $15,000. In the Depression. So let's look inside. The interiors were completed by James Kuhn, an interior designer, and Percival Goodman, who described himself as a modernist architect and designer. They describe the interiors as contemporary, which I think is an interesting point. In this guidebook, they say these following quotes: "A home where every piece has a definite function to perform and is part of a coherent structure, each dovetailing and contributing by its own line, form, and color to the harmony of the ensemble as a whole." They go on to say, "The American is beginning to see that the modern house that looks so crazy are really livable. They're really homes." And the modern architect takes into consideration not only how a house looks, but how it runs. The home must function smoothly. And that sounds a lot like Le Corbusier's machine for living to me. The furniture you see here, and is also in the exhibition upstairs, they chose this from the firm of the John Whitcomb Company of Grand Rapids, Michigan, for the bedroom, the dining room, which is what you see here, and living room cabinets. The guidebook goes into great detail talking about the fine craftsmanship and exotic woods that were used to make these pieces. While the pieces are designed based on functionality, there is something in them, for me, which is reminiscent of the 1925 Paris exhibition, and that's in this idea of the luxury materials used. I love being able to show that there are some color pictures from this exhibition. And it's often thought that the house was pink, but I'm going to say no to that. There are certain things, and you'll see as we go on. When you see the house now, and you'll see it at the end here, it is pink. But at the time, at the time of the fair, this was a white house, which of course draws it even closer to the Bauhaus. The designer said each room should be light and airy and a symphony of color. Each piece of furniture is part of a coordinated design in line, color, and comfort. The McKay Company did the metal furniture, and here's where you really see the strongest connection to the Bauhaus, especially in the patio furniture. And the magazine stand, which is also upstairs. You can see it above. It was represented in the guidebook as one of their finest pieces of craftsmanship, or machine craftsmanship. That America should be the last nation to recognize the beauty and validity of metal furniture is not strange, the designers say. Basically, blame it on our youth, was their defense. We didn't see the beauty in metal until now. Metal furniture is an art whose expression depends on its utility as contrasted with the decorative or ornamental aspects of older arts. And finally, they ask, why does the modern architect of Germany and France prefer it, this metal furniture? Their answers are, metal furniture has the beauty of modern things, of airplanes, of automobiles, and because it is made wholly by machine, quickly and always uniformly. All right, so here we are on the way to Miami Beach. Streamline architecture in Miami is characterized by its long horizontal curved buildings, portable windows, and other nods to nautical architectural design, flagpoles as decorative elements, and metal tube railing, much like what we see here in Robert Laweed's design for the Florida Tropical Home of 1933. Again, notice in his drawing, it's white. Art Deco architecture in Miami is much more decorative with carved door and window surrounds, with friezes of abstract geometric and organic patterns. An excellent example of this is the Sears, Roebuck and Company Tower that's now the Books and Books at the Adrian Arch Center. It was impressively early for its time in the United States to be Art Deco, and it was the first Art Deco building in Miami. Tropical Deco combines these two, combines Art Deco and Streamline. So this is where the 1925 and the 1933 World's Fairs meet. It's as if you're walking onto a film set when you come to Miami Beach. Robert Lawweed was really the key to bringing streetline to Miami. His architecture read as much more modernist and along the lines of the Bauhaus. And here's why he's so important. He takes part in a pivotal moment where streamline came to the beach. It was in 1935, after the close of this fair, that he designed and built the Eastman residence, also known as the General Electric model home for all its modern technologies on La Gorse. It was light yellow with a door surrounded by carved Florida keystone and used new materials like formica, vitrolite, and glass blocks. It was not only an early streamline building, but he was introducing elements of what would become Tropical Deco. It was the combining of the 1925 French Art Deco and the 1933 version of the German Bauhaus styles. Robert Lawweed was educated at the Carnegie Institute of Technology in Pittsburgh and served in World War I, after which he came to Miami in 1919 and never left. Weed designed this house for the Eastman brothers, Irving and Nathaniel. They were set designers in New York City and had designed dramatic lighting for the 1933 World's Fair, and that was how they met, and he designed this house for the fair. There it is, the pink house. Florida Tropical Home after the fair. In 1935, it was moved by barge to Beverly Shores, Indiana. Pictured here on the barge is the Wiebolt-Rostone house, but they were all moved in a similar fashion. It was listed in 1986 on the Register of Historic Places. It was painted flamingo pink. And just look at that furniture. They were no longer considering how metal furniture was functional and beautiful. But I don't want to end on the sad note of that furniture, so I'm going to end with another quote from the guidebook. It says, "Nowhere in America has architecture been so thoroughly adapted to local conditions as it has in Florida, and the Florida Tropical Home is the last word in the small home architecture of Florida." Well, I'm not sure that this particular house ever got the chance to prove this point. I think architecture here, like the Eastman residence and every streamline hotel along Miami Beach, has gotten the chance to prove that, so.
Well, I am grateful to Whitney for kicking us off with the Florida Tropical Home, in part because I think it's an amazing structure, but also because I think it connects in very interesting ways to the Cedric Gibbons and Dolores Del Rio house, which I'll be speaking about. The Cedric Gibbons and Dolores Del Rio house was built, as you might expect, for Cedric Gibbons and Dolores Del Rio in Santa Monica, California, and the house was completed in 1930. The architect on record was Douglas Honnold, who was known better for designing the the Samuel Goldwyn estate, which you can see on the left, which is now owned by Taylor Swift. So if you know her, you can get an invite, report back. And as well as quite a bit of commercial architecture throughout Los Angeles. What's interesting to me about Douglas Honnold, though, is that he was very much willing to sublimate his own sort of design aesthetic for the interests and preferences of his clients. And even more so when they were a design partner. One of the things that he's famous for is collaborating with John Lautner, who of course is known for the really fabulous atomic age architecture that is all over Los Angeles. And so you don't really get a sense of who Douglas Honnold was in his buildings, you get a sense of who his collaborator was. And in this case, the most important collaborators for this house were Cedric Gibbons and his wife, Dolores Del Rio. And specifically, Cedric Gibbons takes the leading role in this project. Cedric Gibbons was an art director for MGM. He has over 1,500 art direction credits to his name, making him the single most credited person, I believe, in Hollywood still. It's a misleading number because as the director of all art production for MGM, his name shows up on every single movie they made. But he has over 150 films that he directly oversaw to his name, and also operated quite an attentive shop. So he had his fingers in all of his underlings' work as well. Cedric Gibbons was born in New York. His father was an architect, and after working as a draftsman in his father's firm following World War I, he comes to Los Angeles and immediately is hired by Samuel Goldwyn and then eventually MGM to be the art director. And what we think of as the golden age of MGM films, their look, their feel is in large part due to his vision. In 1930, he marries Dolores Del Rio, who was a Mexican actress. She's known for her roles in silent films, Ramona, I have to find the whole list of them, but it's a number of them, Joanna, What Christ Glory, and also makes the transition to talkies. She actually sings the central song from Ramona to prove to the MGM muffy mucks that she can talk. They say her accent is charming, and so then she starts getting talking roles. Dolores Del Rio and Douglas Humboldt have a brief-ish and I believe tumultuous relationship, but out of it comes this home. One thing that I think is so interesting about Whitney's discussion of this transition from what we think of as art moderne or art deco to streamline is the way in which this home really represents both of those elements at once. The front facade, what you would see from the street, is this very blank structure, not incredibly fascinating, but it does have these wonderful curves and what we think of as sort of stepped telescoping lines, which is so central to Art Deco design. And in the back, which is really where all the action happens, is very much a streamlined home that shares many of the same characteristics of the Florida tropical house, from the overhanging sort of eyebrowish shades to the large windows, and then of course the indoor-outdoor entertaining space, which would greatly expand the potential for the home, and is something that you can really only do in warm climates like Miami and Los Angeles. The home had, so that's when I say telescoping lines, that's what I'm talking about. The home had, the main home had 3 bedrooms, and then there was also a guest house, a pool house. And a swimming pool, a tennis court, and terraced gardens on a 33,000 square foot lot. So we're looking at a very large site. So the telescoping door lines, I just want you guys to keep this in mind because it's all about drawing you into the home. It's this very flat facade and then it pulls you right in. And this is where we begin to see like just the very beginning of Cedric Gibbons' talent as a set designer being employed in this home. You would enter on the second level, which is the street level, into this grand living room. This is the primary living space, and you can see it's broken up into all of these more intimate conversational environments. This was a home for entertaining. And it was also a home for public presentation, for performance even. That wonderful stepped ceiling, which takes kind of the central role in the room, is in many ways inspired by the Jean Dunant smoking room that was on view at the 1925 Paris exposition. Cedric Gibbons reportedly did go to the fair. There's some slight conflict about that because he would have also been working on a movie at that time. But I think he was probably able to, he claimed to have seen it. And it seems that maybe he just snuck away and got to go to the fair. And you can see again those telescoping lines that are so important. And here we see Dolores Del Rio in her element in the home, which again just emphasizes the degree to which it was a set for her as much as it was a house. A lot of the furniture was custom made for the home, including those bookcases, which are actually, as this quote from Photoplay in 1931, where the house was published, says, "The case upon which Dolores is reclining is a Davenport in disguise, and what looks like a counter in the foreground is the rail of a secret stairway leading to the boudoir. Tricky? Question mark." So the whole house is about discovery and is about sort of it's playful in its character. This is the home as it is today. We're lucky to have really great photography from the home because it was on the market recently. One of the things that's so interesting is how much more full it is now. Despite the fact that the furniture was quite large and blocky, Gibbons and Del Rio made sure to leave a lot of space to circulate in the home, as well as to appreciate that very glossy travertine floor, which will become important in a later moment. And so then when you would go down the stairs, which was hidden as a counter, you would enter the second living room, which is much more smaller, more intimate. It leads in one direction to the boudoir. There's not great photography of that space now, but supposedly it was quite beautiful, mirrored, and very much Dolores's domain. And then the other direction leads to the kitchen and the dining room. And what you can see in the dining room is the way in which lighting plays a really important role in this house. Again, Cedric Gibbons is a set designer. He thinks about things like lighting. And so you can see the lights that are embedded into the staircase above the dining table, as well as the lighting that sort of functions as a clear story in the second living room above the fireplace on that sort of lip. And so in the evening, this home would have been illuminated and the shadows would have played a really important part in your appreciation of it. And of course, the evening is when they're doing the bulk of their entertaining. The house, of course, had a swimming pool. It is LA, after all. And you can see Gary Cooper enjoying a dip in the pool. And again, you see the repetition of geometry and angles over and over and over again. This is a very square home. It's a home that likes right angles. And then the pool house itself, which you can see in the back of this family photo, again has that stacked design that really makes it a stage backdrop for the theatrics, planned and perhaps unplanned, that could have taken place in front of them. So it's a shift, right? Cedric Gibbons had as I said, over 150 known credits to his name as a set designer. And one of the ones that's most important, obviously, is The Wizard of Oz. And one of the reasons I wanted to call it out is not just because it so wonderfully captures the design of this Art Deco moment in American film history, where designers are kind of taking Art Deco and making it fantastical for the movies. But it also speaks to use of color. The majority of the photographs from this time period of the house are in black and white, and the house looks very glamorous. It actually would have been significantly more colorful. There was this glossy black floor, period accounts list red upholstery, green upholstery, white sailcloth for the windows. And so there's a real, the role of color in this home is real and present. And you can see how powerful color is for designers like Cedric Gibbons in, of course, one of the first and most important. And that stacked design that we see all over the house appears in both spaces. Also that glossy black floor that he was so fond of. He basically lifts it out of the set and installs it in his home. Also, the furniture itself is right in line with the furniture that he had commissioned for the home. And again, there's that wonderful doorway that pulls you right in, and you see in his set design for the Kiss that same interest in telescoping stepped patterns, as well as sort of doors that dwarf you and then are dwarfed by the space itself. So he had a real interest in scale that was deeply theatrical. The fireplaces, you can see Our Dancing Daughters in 1929, practically the exact same fireplace. I also love this photo of Del Rio and Gibbons because they look like they might be Morticia and Gomez Adams. It's just so dramatic, and you again get the effect of that deeply dramatic lighting. It's hard to imagine this couple living in this home without it being dramatically lit. Like, I don't know what it would have been like during the day, but they show off the home and themselves to their best in the evening. And then in the Kiss in 1929, we actually see the exact same table. So you see on the left that wonderful sort of triangular conical table, and then it's in the corner of their smaller living room. So in some cases, he's just lifting furniture straight out of his sets. And another example, one of my favorites, is this steel chair or the chair with the arms, the metal curved arms in the back of the Easiest Way set, is the same as the chair in the very, very back of the living room, if you can see that. And it's actually, also in the forefront. They've got two of them. So with those curved steel arms and then the upholstered back and seat. In this case, the Easiest Way came out in 1931, where we know that these photographs were taken in either 1930 or 31 for the house. So I like to think that he was doing up the set and just picked up a chair from his house and like brought it onto the MGM back lot, and was like, okay, job done. The house, of course, goes on to have a much longer life after Del Rio and Gibbons' short marriage. They are married in 1930, they divorce in 1941. Not entirely, but certainly partially because of her affair with Orson Welles. She ends up returning to Mexico for a while and starring in many of the golden age of Mexican film production, many of their kind of most famous films. She also maintains a home in Santa Barbara in California, which is a Spanish revival house, kind of classic Santa Barbara, Southern California, stucco, terracotta tiles. And the striking difference between that house and this house makes me think that though Cedric Gibbons was clearly designing the home as a set for his wife, I don't think he was thinking about what she wanted. It was his vision for her in this home that is what triumphed in the house. And then the moment they're separated, she goes on to build a very traditional Southern California hacienda-style home. Gibbons lives in the house for a little bit longer, remarries, moves out, and the house proceeds to have a number of owners. It also, fittingly for a home that's built like a movie set, shows up in a lot of films. Twilight with Susan Sarandon and, oh gosh, why am I blanking on his name? Paul Newman makes an appearance. The home is kind of the central part of that film. It also shows up, Whitney just reminded me today, in Cafe Society, which was a recent Woody Allen movie. So if you watch the first couple seconds of Cafe Society, you'll see it all lit up like it's still the 1920s. But the home, I think, occupies this fascinating place. It is both domestic space and theatrical film set. It is both an Art Deco exterior and then a streamlined back. It's a chameleon. It is everything to all the people who need it to do different things, and it's I think maybe uniquely Californian in that way as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for being here on a Saturday night and to be so patient to listen to my third presentation. I will try to be fast, but I have a lot of images, I already tell you. So we cross the ocean and we go back to my homeland, Italy. It's a completely different context, not as glamorous as the beautiful Villa Santa Monica. It's a very particular, like a curiosity. It's a villa which is really interesting in the history of architecture of the 20th century, but not so well known. And it was built in Marcellise, which is a small town near Verona, so in the Po Valley, in the hills on the Po Valley, and was created as a revolving house that tried to maximize the sun the light of the sun, since it was a summer house built by an engineer who was born in this town in 1884. He studied engineering at the Royal School of Engineering in Genoa and then in Padua, and started to work as a engineer in the state railway. For this reason, he had some technical knowledge of how to make a house, rotate. As you see, the family is not as glamorous as the couple that Shoshana just showed. It's the family father, so the engineer wanted to build a summer house for him and his two children. Here are at the airport in 1935 in Frankfurt when the house was built. But the project started before. The first drawings are dated 1929, and then it took 4 years to build the house because the walls were mainly made during the spring and the summer season. You can see the landscape and the villa when it was finished. You see the land is huge. He came back to his for summer. He wanted to build a house which was a kind of landmark for the landscape, a kind of a tourist attraction that his hometown didn't have. And if you think of the country houses of the nobility of Verona, near Verona, there is really no connection. It was something completely new for the landscape. You can see he bought the land with the farm, with an old farm from the Renaissance period, and you can see in the back this really machine-like building. And you can see it's still surviving in this landscape, which is mostly vineyards and fruit trees. You can see from the structure how the house works from above. This is an aerial photograph, and you can see it was really made for summer to enjoy the landscape with the tennis court on the left and the swimming pool on the right. And you can see here the swimming pool with this slide in reinforced concrete. It has a shape which makes us think of dynamism and speed typical of the futurist movement, which was for sure influential in the building of this house. So I would like to show you really the working process of the construction of the house. You can see there is a kind of dichotomy between the masonry, concrete part, and the structure, the rotating structure, which is in concrete, in reinforced concrete, and it's really interesting to see how it rotates. The hub is the spiral staircase, and you can see in the next. So you can see here how it was the frame. Was reinforced with the panels in aircrete, which was one of the new materials used at the time. It was a combination of wood, wood powder and concrete. And it was one of the new materials which were advertised during the fascist period, since they were cheap. And naturally, they tried to use concrete in the beginning, but with the rotation of the house, there were cracks on the surface, so for this reason, they found aircrete panels the best solution. And you can see the structure, how the house rotates from this image. You can see how the contrast between the masonry base of the building and this rotating element, which reminds of aerial or naval elements, especially because the surface, as you can see, it's all clad in aluminum alloy. And you can see how he's really inspired. Naturally, he was an engineer. He was not just a constructor. He was also an engineer, and was helped by a mechanical engineer in the construction of these rails that allowed the house to rotate. As you can see, there are trays and these wheels. And the speed of the house is it's 9 inches per minute, so it's a very slow movement, and it takes 9 hours to rotate, to do a complete rotation of a 360-degree rotation. You can see how it has been built, like how it's digging in the hill, and how it starts to turn in the upper part, which is also the rooftop. And you can see here some details. This is really on the left. On the right, you can see the hub of the rotating house. The house was, when it was finished in 1936, the magazine Architettura, which was one of the most important, directed by Marcello Piacentini, was like the favorite architect of Mussolini, published it in the cover, and they really made a great article on it, just concentrating on the technical part. And then also was published on L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui in 1937. But rather than that, there was a misunderstanding about this building, because a few years before, in 1930, Dr. Jean Seidman in France had built a solarium, a rotating solarium in a spa community, Aix-les-Bains. And he wrote to Vernizzi, the engineer of Villa Girasole, calling him a colleague, thinking that his house was actually a kind of hospital for sun therapy. Naturally, the Villa Girasole is the first villa which was built, like the first revolving villa, but there are some famous avant-garde projects, like the well-known model for the monument of the Third International by Vladimir Tatlin, that it was never built. It was supposed to be 1/3 higher than the Eiffel Tower, and even if it's just resting, with these spiral structures, it looks as it is in motion. But before that, there were around 1895, Jesse Lake was a Methodist preacher. He designed an observation revolving tower for the beach of Atlantic City. And he didn't patent it, so the project was stolen by Thomas Warwick, an English architect, who started to design some of these towers along the English coast. This is probably the most famous one that lasted until 1941, and then was damaged during the war in Warwick. And then naturally, revolving restaurants became in kind of fashion. The first project was by Norman Belgedis for the Chicago World's Fair. It was a restaurant with on 3 floors, and it was never realized, but it's for sure one of the most interesting projects of the time. So looking in our collection, I was trying to see if we have any revolving towers, and I found this postcard, which represents the Tower of the Americas at Hemisphere in San Antonio, Texas in 1968. So I think it's very interesting, and it's also great to find sometimes in our collection objects which are not really from our period, which usually stops in 1945 or 1950. And actually, the first revolving restaurant known after the war is the Merry-Go-Round restaurant in Miami, which was just across the University of Miami campus. I just found a postcard. I don't know if anybody ever heard of it, but I just found postcards, and I assume that it has existed. So going back to the villa, it's just to show you through some photographs how it really rotates and how the vegetation grew when the Vernizzi started to live in the house. And naturally, he was the engineer and the constructor, but he had also an architect. He was also a set designer. Ettore Fagioli. The design of the house, as you can see, has also a kind of a classical reminiscence in the use of the loggia of the Paris style surrounding the lower part, the masonry part of the building. And you can see the entrance is definitely has elements which are definitely deco, like these two columns of like these truncated cones, typically that remind of chandeliers of the 1920s. And even the rusticated wall is much more represents what is the Italian version of Art Deco, which is the Novecento style. And these photographs of the period show the daughter in the 1930s, naturally like enjoying this summer house built by her father. This is the entrance, the corridor that leads to the center of the masonry basement, leads to the elevator. So you can see the Girasole means the sunflower, and the artist Felix De Sinero was commissioned to design the logo, which appears on the floor in these tiles, mosaic tiles. And as you can see on the left, there is the button that you had to push to make the villa turn when you entered the house. You can see here, it's very simple. And actually, from in every room, there was a way from your bed to make the villa stop or turn. This is the view of the stairwell, and you can see the use of glass blocks just to try to get light to the hub of the villa. And naturally, you could also take the stairs and arrive to the terrace, which is really the terrace above the loggia. Is the part where people used for entertaining. It was the roof terrace, which is a typical element of functionalist architecture. And here the group of, I assume that some of these are artists collaborating with Invernizzi. Invernizzi was really active in Genoa, so here is the group of people who worked with him in the design of the villa. So he really gathered with him skilled craftsmen, artistic creative personalities and technicians to create this masterpiece in his hometown. I think it's interesting to see some of the interiors because again it's 2 floors. Have you seen the structure is like an L, and in the first floor it's like the day part of the house with the kitchen, the studios and the living room. And you can see the service, like the service rooms, like the kitchen is in the center, and the cupboard is curving because it's just leaning on the hub of the center of the rotating part. And the use of the marble above the sink is typical of Genoa, of Liguria, this use of the marble for plates. As you can see, everything was really custom made, from the silverware to the dinnerware, using the symbol of the sunflower even in the dinnerware. And the walls are usually covered with textile, because it was also a kind of counterpart to the very mechanical and more machine-like appearance of the exterior, and also was a way to cover the cracks which were caused by the rotation. You can see the use of tubular steel furniture. And this is the studio of the engineer. It's completely like everything is kept as it was, because the children try to keep it as their father designed the house. And this is the master room with again custom made furniture with the use of vellum on the surface. And in the headboard there is a mosaic by Sacorotti, who was one of the artists were invited by Invernizzi to decorate the house. And to end up with the bathroom, again with this use of tiles and so the villa was really his masterpiece, and he enjoyed it until his death in the 1950s. The children tried to keep it at its best, and in 1935 he started a project for the so-called skyscraper Martini, because it was on the top, on the roof terrace, there was one of the Martini cocktail bars. It was designed by Invernizzi as an engineer and by Marcello Piacentini as an architect. And it was, you won't believe it, but it has been the highest building in Italy until 1959. When the famous Pirelli skyscraper was built in Milan and designed by Giobondi. And you can see how, from a drawing of the period, the model of the American skyscrapers were very the models for Marcello Piacentini and for Invernizzi, Angelo Invernizzi. Since you haven't seen enough images, I would like just to show you.
All'epoca, quando arrivavamo dalla città, la casa era già stata aperta. Il custode abitava in basso, vicino all'entrata del parco. Apriva la casa solo per qualche settimana, per prepararla alle nuove stagioni, come si preparano gli abiti in primavera e in autunno. Era il periodo della raccolta delle ciliegie, o più in là, della vendemmia. È rimasto tutto com'era. Il custode vive ancora nella casetta presso l'entrata. Continua ad occuparsi di tutto quando io non ci sono, del parco, della casa, delle macchine e degli attrezzi. Tutto deve essere tenuto insieme e lui questo lo sa e quindi tutto è rimasto come papà l'aveva ideato. Quando papà apriva la porticella di vetro per premere il bottone più in alto, lo faceva con un gesto casuale, come se manipolasse l'interruttore della luce. Poi per un attimo si fermava, come se ascoltasse. Il girasole si muove in modo impercettibile, come un orologio. Ci mette una giornata per compiere il giro completo. Il movimento lo vedevano soltanto i bimbi e le persone che andavano a curiosare presso le macchine. Credo che non fosse il muoversi della casa ad attirare mio padre. Lui era affascinato dalla serenità di questa casa imponente, che a volte può guardare la valle, a volte le colline e a volte i ciliegi.
If you have any questions, you're free to go. Actually, the home has been occupied until the children were alive. So the daughter died 10 years ago, and since then has been donated to the School of Architecture in Mendrisio, the School of Architect Mario Botta. And now actually it's the foundation of the bank in Verona that takes care of the house. So the house is not anymore it's open to scholars, but it's not, nobody lives there. You have to contact the Bank of Verona to go, yes. But it's really worthwhile.
I knew very well the lady who was pictured here. She was a benefactor of the Wolfsonian in Genoa, and she was remarkable. It's one of the marvels of architecture to see this huge, imposing evolve and serve. It's really a cosmic experience. And she was very meticulous, and she maintained the villa till the day she died. And in Genoa, they built one of the great developments of the 20th century. And Piacentini, who was the great architect of the regime, built that monumental building, reinforced concrete in the world with the fastest elevators. And when the bombs were launched on Genoa, they bounced off the building. So it survived the war, as everything around it was destroyed. It sits there even to this day. And it's one of the great monuments of, again, 20th century architect, Mr. Bersini, that was a genius. And Silvia, thank you very much. It's a wonderful presentation. And all of you, it was brilliant. The Loris Del Rio, just that way back, and the movies. And of course, we're so lucky that because we have the furniture upstairs of the Florida house. So that has come over.